unsurpassable Buddha. Homage to the immaculate Dharma. Homage to the harmonious Sangha. Homage to the Buddha. Homage to the Dharma. Homage to the Sangha. It is a weighty time. And as we study together this autumn, we've been focusing on the teachings of the Prajnaparamita, but I know people are studying many other things as well. But all of the Buddhist teachings, they spring from and return to suffering, to the First Noble Truth. It doesn't mean that our way is not a joyous way. It means that to face squarely the issue of suffering was what Shakyamuni Buddha had the courage to do. And the Dharma that sprung from his conviction has been passed down to us today. And so, with all of the anxiety over the political situation, all of the grief for a human world that has been created through such brutality and pain. We also have the chance for liberation. We have a stream of Dharma which meets the suffering squarely. And so as we investigate the Dharma, it's orienting us to that meeting. It's orienting us to deep compassion. And so although the Prajnaparamita teachings are wisdom teachings, prajna is usually translated as wisdom, wisdom never comes without compassion. Or if it does, it doesn't qualify as Buddha wisdom. That for wisdom to really be the medicine of the Buddha, it has to be, it has to have the face of compassion, not just the face of wisdom. So this is a hope, what we've been studying, and I'm sure that you have ran into many things, and so these are good opportunities for us to explore in a very direct way, not too complicated, very direct way. What is the way? What is the way to live out this medicine, to receive and to live out this medicine? So I invite you to bring forward whatever is on your mind.
Ejo.
Hi.
8,000 lines. It's a lot of questions. It's a lot of words.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of riddles. But this abiding, this dwelling, this coursing, what does this feel like to you, Ejo?
gotta be kidding me. This is what we're doing? Endowed with minds and hearts and bodies that are beyond fathom. And this is what we're doing? That's the deluded side. But that delusion has a deep wisdom. And so I endeavor not to deny it. You see, we are deeply invested in overcoming, in dominating. And for me, the truth of compassion can also become a story of domination. I want to turn my heart soft. I want to meet everything with graciousness and love. But this is a domination of my exasperated spirit. And so now I'm listening to that. And endeavoring not to muffle the exasperation. It feels just like that.
People at this moment really directly aware of that gate or spark of life and death at the center of things, and I don't want to waste it. I want to learn to rely on it, to meet the world through it. How can I cultivate this practice?
Last week in the Teisho, I brought up the case of Ungand and Dogo, who were discussing the hands and eyes of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And this question that you're asking, how do we stay attuned to the spark of life and death? It's this question of perceiving and responding. And so the question which is asked there, what does Avalokiteshvara do with all of these hands and eyes? Or what is done by the using of all these hands and eyes? We have to make this our question. What is a total response? What is not running away from the deep stream of suffering, but facing it squarely, facing it like a cliff, an unsurpassable cliff. And in that place of no escape, a true response is possible. Until we're completely caught, we will always try to work our way around. We always try to make some workaround, which is self-preserving. So it's not so much trying to do something, it's more like losing. In a way, you've lost everything. And that's where something becomes possible.
I find the hymn to Perfection of Wisdom very inspiring for some years now. But lately I felt like there's too much light, not in a bad way, but where do I find the balance that would be a consort to that in a sense?
Yeah. So in the hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom, there's a lot of light imagery. So she's an incomparable fountain of light. This is the terms that are used in that. We chant that on the weekday mornings, but not on Sundays and other places. So some people may not have heard that before. It's a hymn to the praise of the perfection of wisdom. In this case, known as the mother of all Buddhas. So one way that the mother of the Buddhas is talked about as light, a fountain of light. But that fountain of light is the womb of the Buddhas. What we refer to as the Tathagata Garbha, the womb of the Tathagata. And to know the embrace of that womb is to enter into total darkness. So, as Ungan and Dogo discuss the functioning of compassion, they talk about wisdom, reaching behind in the middle of the night, reaching for a pillow behind in the middle of the night was the first answer. So this is a discussion about the body of prajna. It's completely all accepting, completely all accepting, and so no light can escape. It's just like a total darkness. And in our practice, if we are looking for the light, we'll just make something up. And so it's better for us to practice taking the backward step, not moving into something we can see, but moving backwards into the darkness. This is relying on the womb of the Buddha, relying on the dark embrace, which is beyond our conception. And it takes a bravery to be willing to meet what's there when we step back into the darkness. That's mostly what keeps us from it. We move forward because we can move into what we know. We can move into what we see. We can move into something that we can predict. But this practice is asking us to step back into what we don't know, what we can't see. And when we do that, it takes encountering mystery, which is also a place where the unexpected lurks. So I don't know how direct that instruction is, but does it point you?
Yeah, it's addressing my question. It's giving me some sense of direction, in a sense.
No wonder we can think about this is the pupil of the eye. The pupil of the eye is the fountain of light. This is, we think only in terms of light entering the eye, in a kind of functional sense of how the eye functions. But if we think of this pupil, this is the gateway of vision, right? In both directions. It is an aperture of seeing, but it is total absence. It is emptiness. The pupil of the eye is not anything. It looks black, it looks like a disc, but it is simply an aperture. And the womb is like that. It's like the Tao Te Ching, it would say, the function of the wheel is the hub, where there's nothing. The function of the house is not the walls. The function of the house is the empty space inside the walls. And so this principle is also there. So how do we can't see our eye, but we can practice to know consciousness. We can practice to know seeing. But to know seeing, we have to be willing to relinquish the object of seeing. If seeing is just about the object that we grab onto, then we never know of the pupil. We only know of the seeing. And this is it's another way to go at it. Might have scared you off with yelling in the first question.
Ejo,
Hi.
to riff off some of what people have already been talking about in your answers. The word that's coming to me a lot is faith. That there's something we take movement towards, in a sense, or there is a kind of movement, but it's not the typical kind of knowing which we usually employ. But I have what is faith? In a Buddha sense, and maybe in what you're talking about, what is relied upon? What is that?
So the suffering, the dukkha, is reliable. And it's not a problem to be solved. It's an invitation. And the flow of that dukkha is our faith. And in the practice of that, not just going along saying, oh yeah, life is full of a lot of difficulties, not much can be do about that, so I'm going to emphasize the joy, I'm going to emphasize the good parts and try to just minimize the negative parts. So this is holding it at bay, right? I'm saying to stay deeply connected to that river of pain, as I've been calling it. Right? That river of pain is a river that leads to nirvana. It is a river of nirvana. But it's only our rejection that keeps us from knowing its wisdom. So if I were to say what is faith, faith isn't that we will go to a particular place. Now, faith is moving together, not making an obstruction of suffering. And just to say that, is a pointer. But what deep embrace can we intuit with our whole being, not just our idea. Like you could tell yourself, okay, I really want to not lift off of the suffering. That's good. I encourage you to think that way. But then how do you actually not lift off of the suffering? So Zazen is an example of that. Zazen is maybe our most central example. This is why Bodhidharma said to face the wall unwaveringly. Boom, there it is. The wall is right. It's right here. Well, it's that river. Am I gonna stay attentive, or am I going to make the project of getting away? It's almost just that simple. And because that can be unbearable, we have good friends. Because sometimes we can't stay there by ourselves. Even Bodhidharma, Taiso Eka showed up. Bodhidharma, as far as we know, didn't seem too enthusiastic about that. Right? But still, his friend was there. And he had to cut his arm off, throw it in the snow to convince. Some people think he was trying to convince Bodhidharma to let him sit with him. I think he just had to convince himself. As far as the record says, Bodhidharma never told him he couldn't sit with him. He just never told him he could. There's no barrier. For Bodhidharma, no barrier. But Eka needed the invitation to be able to sit. So he had to convince himself. To me, this is a part that's very important and not necessarily emphasized. By facing that cliff is not to say that we become hard like the cliff. Actually, when we face that cliff, this is why Bodhidharma, he said, to see that the sage and the ordinary person are the same. I have to be willing to be that ordinary person, the person who will be crushed by the tragedy. But that person who will be crushed by the tragedy is also the sage. And these two are inseparable. Right?
So wisdom, we talk about it as I think it's both an action and a quality.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to cultivating wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
If so, how is that? And is it, can it grow?
Mm. So we can think about this in two ways. One is wisdom itself is totally ungraspable and is beyond accounting. And in this sense, there's absolutely no growth or shrinking in wisdom. It just is a fact of the total intimacy of life. There's no gap between anything. And a life that is coursing in that truth can mature. And in that maturity, we can talk about wisdom as something to cultivate. But this is very different than gaining it. Gaining it would be capturing something. It's not as if our relationship with it changes. It's just that we learn to rely on it more skillfully or completely. So the example that Kyogen Carlson Roshi would also often give is that of gravity. It would say everyone's relationship to gravity is exactly the same. It doesn't change at all. Right? But there's a big difference between falling down the stairs and walking down the stairs. There's a big difference between gliding across the floor with the dancing steps, and stumbling across. All of them are exactly equal expressions of gravity. No one gets more or less relationship through gravity. Right? So we can think about the Dharma in this way, in general. And then when we think about prajna, the intimacy which is prajna is everywhere and permeates everything. But how will we rely on that? This is what we functionally call wisdom. This is why Avalokiteshvara can be coursing in, can be deeply practicing the prajna paramita, and then suffering can be liberated. Right? Maybe I'll change the tone just a little bit. How are you? How are people now?
Not good.
Yeah.
Suffering.
Yeah. As I was watching the election results come in on Tuesday, and I was looking at that map of the New York Times, that's what I was looking at, with the count. And this thing happened in my mind. I was looking at all of those red and blue states and just a handful of gray ones, over time. And then suddenly, my focus on the states and what color they were and what numbers were beside them shifted to a feeling for all of the people that are populating all of those states. And first it was a feeling like, how could there be so many people voting Trump? That was the first way I experienced it, like feeling the massive number of people. And then I was feeling like, oh, how many, are we voting, because I voted for Biden, was thinking, are we voting for Biden or am I voting against Trump? That was the next feeling I had. And the next feeling I had was, what a sea of suffering. There's person upon person there that is suffering. And again, it doesn't mean it's all suffering, right? I don't mean to be downer here, but that there is this thing, there's this itch that we don't know how to scratch, and this is driving us to take these surface level images of progress or regress or what's right or what's not right, and to cling to them as if they're going to be the solution to our problems. And the political fight is necessary. I believe that totally, but it's not enough. It's not enough. So I think it's important that we are clear about that with ourselves, and then clear about that as we're talking with other people, to express the weight of it.
Ejo,
Mm-hmm.
can I go again?
Sure.
Can I ask another?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just say how I go. didn't you ask how are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I think that I experience a thinness of sensitivity or vulnerability I think is what's happening, not just that I'm in some space, although that's possible, but that it's my response to there's really very little solid ground. Maybe there never was.
Yeah.
I keep feeling that we're in a cauldron of practice.
Yeah.
And all the things that we think for years that I'm practicing, and I think many sincerely have been, but there's a way that it's acute now.
Yeah.
Getting together on Sunday, it was exquisitely wonderful. And of course, we've always liked it, but we expected it to happen the next week.
Yeah.
So it hadn't happened for a while,
Yeah.
and so then I say, well, this is the level of appreciation that should be happening all the time.
Yeah.
About whatever the thing is, being able to have coffee with someone, in any of the small things that seem exquisite now because we don't do them all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm just using that as a metaphor. So how I am is it's somewhat moment to moment, and that's also maybe how it ought to be all the time. But I can't really. So anyway, I'm just going on. But that's how I am, and I think from what I hear, it's how a lot of people are.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, thank you. This is. You see, when we think about suffering, we think about suffering as a solid thing. And so that's the mistake. Or that's one of the mistakes. And it is empty. It is spacious. And so that's what makes it the invitation that it is. So if we think about impermanence, for example, like normally, I think that's a very good example. We come on a Sunday, we enjoy ourselves, we have fellowship, we care for each other, and then we expect it's going to happen next week. And so we buy into the continuity, and buying into the idea of the continuity actually muffles something. It shuts down the spaciousness of what's there, because we're not going to accept that one Sunday will be my last Sunday. There will be a last Sunday, right? There will be a last breath.
Right.
And so the inability to accept that, or the unwillingness to accept that, is it dampens everything. It just, it's like putting a wet blanket over our whole life. And so when when we're challenged, if we take that as a point of practice, it's alivening,
Right.
But a little bit like fat and sugar and salt, our diet, our emotional inclination for our diet is for continuity and assuredness. But it's not actually the best diet. A little bit of it's pretty good, but too much, and then we go inert.
This goes back to an earlier. This goes back to an earlier point that we were talking about, but it's a question I have about prajna.
Yeah.
And this line keeps catching me. We relying on prajna paramita, and I keep coming back to that and thinking, how am I actually doing that?
Yeah.
How do I actually rely on prajna?
Yeah. So the first thing is that the reliance isn't a one-time act or even a moment of relying that's then followed by moments of now you've relied and so it just keeps going. It's a continual practice of relying. And the way that we study that continual practice of relying is Zazen. And when I say Zazen, I don't mean the construction of the form. I don't mean holding ourselves in the posture that we've been taught. But I mean the relinquishment which is necessary for the authentic upright sitting to emerge. So, we rock to the right, we rock to the left. This isn't just a warm-up. This is a feeling the right hand side and then letting go of it. Feeling the left hand side, letting go of it. Knowing the importance of both the right and the left, but not holding either one of them, clutching onto either one of them. Then the wholeness of right and left can emerge. And this place in the middle can be discovered. It can be relied upon, right? Not as, okay, this is the middle. It's not the right, it's not the left, it's the middle. We actually have to let go of the right. We have to feel, accept, appreciate, and release. Feel, accept, appreciate, release. And we are doing that over and over. And then as we're sitting, we can feel it happening. Like one side tightens up, and we're releasing. We don't just move a little bit to the middle. When you do that, pretty soon you end up all kind of jaggedy. Yeah, and you can feel it. You're not really in the center. So that's why that practice and feeling at the base of the spine, where is the emergence of the uprightness, which is open and accepting. Right? And so then the same thing with the forward, and the backward in how this uprightness is. If we move that, not just as a metaphor, but as the actual way, if we think about the way we stretch our mind into the future or into the past, that's what we think, we think like if I could just get rid of the future and get rid of the past, then I will just be in the present. But actually the present is just made up of future and past. I mean, there's no present. There's no place called the present. So we say, oh, my mind's wandering to tomorrow. Oh, what time are we going to get out of here? What time will I be able to go to bed? What time do I have to get up in the morning? What do I have to do tomorrow? Or maybe I don't have anything to do and I'm just dreading not having anything to do. So my mind stretches, So I can appreciate and I can release. Maybe I'm remembering, maybe I did something stupid today, or maybe something was really great and I'm letting it still wash over me, right? I can feel that, it's there, it's present, and I can release. And what we call the present is the relying. So relying on, but not grabbing onto these polarities. We accept and we release. And then the reliance from not taking a fixed position in the right or the left or the forward or the backward or the future or the past. That's where the Bodhisattva's activity arises from. No place to stand, no place to stand. Which sounds so challenging. Like I just have to get rid of everything. Well, actually, we do have to get rid of everything. But the getting rid of everything is the finding of this upright being, which is you're totally endowed with. You don't have to go. You don't have to go searching for it in a far off place. You can find it right here. It would be nice if we could just do that, like turn the switch on, and then we're there. But actually, practice requires the continual enacting of that, because we're continually enacting something. Right? And so so practice isn't just, well, I'll do that and then it's all fixed. Practice is learning to continually enact that reliance on prajna in all these facets of our life until that stream becomes as natural as all the ways that we don't rely on prajna are natural. All the grasping ways that we try to navigate the world, as they get transformed, then they also can have that uprightness.
Ejo?
Hi.
It seems like if I detect some ability to push something forward or exercise free will,
Mm-hmm.
it seems correct to try to practice in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, I guess the question arises, like, when does that just become like continuously tuning the lute too tightly?
Mm-hmm. When you don't listen to the feedback. So if we don't listen to the feedback, we just go into a loop, and the loop feeds itself. But if we listen to the feedback, then it guides us in the next step. Putting our intention forward and striving, we take the best step that we can, and as we listen to the feedback, then we can take the next step. And the vow or the deep intention doesn't change, but the navigation changes because we're endeavoring to do it in accord with the environment. And so to give rise to the heart of great effort is so important in anything, like I think about when I became a father. I had no idea what I was in for. I mean, I'd seen children before. I even liked children. I had even been a child. Well, I was practically a child when I became a father. So if I just enacted, if I made the great effort to enact just what I thought it was to be a father, then, you just get in this tighter and tighter loop. If you do your best, doing my best to be a father and then listening to my children, not just what they say, but, like developing receptivity to them, then that deep commitment and vow to carry this thing out that I didn't even know what it is, really, then traction can happen, and we can move forward. So I find this to be the great liberating quality of the path. Liberation isn't just something that happens later. It's that I can be liberated from myself. Just my idea, or just my intention, or just my perspective is what's going to carry me into the next moment. That's like lonely, I need all of the world to help me take a next step. Right.
Ejo?
Is it? Yeah, maybe he was.
I was. Does you want to go first?
You can go, Jacob. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I came into this with questions on my mind, and then throughout the course of this, I have had questions arising, and yet none of them feel quite like what I want to ask. What I'm left is what is the space of a question?
What is the space? of a question?
Yes.
What is the space of a question? I don't think I understand exactly what you're getting at, or quite what you're getting at.
I have a lot of questions kind of rolling around, and it feels like it's like the heads of a hydra, and I'm witnessing the heads sprouting up one after the other, and just standing within the body.
Yeah. Okay. Now I get. So there's a way to work with questions, and this is one of the deepest parts of practice, to feel into this deeply. Did you turn that around? There's no time here. So there's a part of our mind that will just turn into a million different things, like you said, the head of a hydra. And as you think about one, it turns into more, and it thinks about more, and it turns into more. So you can ask any of those questions. It's fine. You can just say, "Oh, this head. Let's talk about that," because it will lead back down to the body, right? It will go back down in. So that's one way to work with a question. Just ask it, whichever one. If there's lots, then it's no problem. You just ask whichever one. But there's another way in which when we're feeling like, oh, I have all these questions, but none of them are they're not really grabbing me. They're not really the thing that I want to put forward, You put a question mark behind anything and it becomes a question. So you're saying, I want to ask a real question. Now that's a different kind of working, right? And what you have to do is you have to stay with the multiplicity of questions. And in the same way that when you go in to try to grab the question, it turns into more and more and more heads. If you just stay with the question and you don't try to answer it, it will start turning into one question. It will start finding its way back to what is underneath and what is a deep and essential question for you. And when you find that question and you can ask it, then something really miraculous happens, right? In a way that we're on the periphery type of a question doesn't happen so easily. So we're leading back down into our own heart, which is where the question comes from in the first place. So I'd encourage you to, with those many, many questions, let them be, don't try to cut off the heads. Just let them be in their fullness, and they will turn into different things, and they will spin around, but just stay there with the question. Don't try to answer it. And you'll start to see it not shrink, but to find its way back home, like to the original head of the hydra. And then ask that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I am seeing a hydra.
Yeah.
I've been trying to. You had described 3 ways in which the Buddha characterized suffering, and there's one that's very subtle, and it's something along the lines of there's a kind of suffering that comes from the fact that all phenomena I experience are conditional. It's subtle because I don't really know what it means. The other kinds of suffering, someone punches you in the face, or you have a pain, or a great loss. There's like a sack of, I can put those things in a sack, and I carry it around with me, and sometimes I have to let it go, sometimes I hit people with it. It follows me in a way that's very tangible. But this other one is more elusive, and today it's so easy to forget how beautiful the season is, and there's a big yellow tree up the street, and there was a gust of wind, and all of the leaves, they were like caught in this updraft and stuck in the air, and it was so beautiful, it hurt me. And like someone punching me, it was like the same. There was no real difference between the kind of heartbreak and shock. And that was, it felt different than studying the conditionality of experience.
Yeah.
You know, it was sort of, is this the right track? Is this a track to follow?
Well, so this is what I mean by the boundlessness of it. That and that suffering's boundlessness is an invitation. We oftentimes just experience it as a limitation on my life, but it's an invitation. So if we think about that level of dukkha, what you're referring to is the classification of dukkha into 3 types. The first one being garden variety suffering, meaning the things we normally would call suffering, like things aren't going well, pain of different kinds. So that's one level of suffering, and is really important. Another level of suffering is that things come and go. So even pleasurable things are suffering because they don't last, right? So that level of suffering is a little more subtle, but we can see it in our life. We can see how it is that we have an anxiousness around loss, for example. That is, there's a thread that's moving through our consciousness all the time in relationship to that. And then this one you're talking about, that phenomena are conditioned. We don't have to stretch it out in time. Things themselves are not what we think they are. And we know that on a deep, deep, deep level. We know that they are ungraspable. That even though our consciousness can hold, I can say, oh, Jaquin, my student, my good friend, I love him. I can't actually know you in the way that my consumptive mind wants to gobble you up and just be done with it. I have now digested Jaquin. I have a deep desire for that, right? Just to face phenomena in that way. And so, but it can't be that way. And so we experience a suffering because we can't gobble the world up and digest it in that way. But thank God we can. Thank God we can. Because that would be a whole other kind of suffering that we don't even have. That would just be that, like, it would be just, all hope would be lost. That suffering is where the beauty of our total interpenetration, our total reliance, those leaves blustering up in the air, is both the suffering of the totally conditioned, but it's also the place in which our heart meets the boundlessness. And what we would call suffering and what we call liberation, we can't lift them apart. And this is just exactly what Kuan Yin is coursing in. And this is just exactly how it is that all of those hands and eyes are responding all the time. Because there's no lifting off. There's no lifting off at all. That's the path of the Bodhisattva. So we can learn about that. And for some people, you're an artist, and the aesthetic world, you live there, and you can be touched in a way through that is so profound. But everybody has the world they live in, and everyone will be touched in in different ways. So the reason I say that is I think sometimes, because we're given to aesthetics and poetry, at least at Buddha Eye, and then you might feel like, oh, I don't feel so poetic, or I don't feel so aesthetically driven, and then you can feel a little like, oh, I'm not so zen. But that's not the case. Actually, just feel for it in your life. You know, when you turn the shovel over in the ground and there's a worm that just dances across the soil. You know, okay, I'm getting kind of poetic again. But I mean the actual experience of it, not your, just the kind of aliveness that you feel in your body. When you pay attention, pay attention to that, you can know about this suffering in a different way. And it often takes us, it takes us noticing. It also takes us being willing to stop. I read this kind of dorky thing earlier this evening. I was looking at my wife's Facebook. That's how I get around not having social media, is I look at my wife's if I want to see pictures of friends or something like that. And people, I'm sure some of you are on social media, and just people post dorky things, right? And then every once in a while you read one because you're just trying not to think about too much stuff. And there was one about love. And so apparently they had asked all of these children, like 8 and younger, what love is. And then it's this whole list of the best things that were said. There's sort of a list of 25. And all just kind of stuff that makes you, kind of weepy-eyed. I'm very sappy, so I like that kind of thing. But there was one boy, I think he was 6, and he said, it's like Christmas morning if you just stop opening presents and listen. And the reason I bring that up is that facing that thing that you're talking about, that level of dukkha, it really does take the stopping, opening the presents. And so often when we see the next moment and the next moment and the next moment as a kind of, I don't mean present as like gift from God. Like that's great, oh, what gift is now? Oh, this gift, thank you. But the kind of like, oh, what's this one? I mean, that's how I open presents on Christmas morning, right? It's like, what do I get next? Oh, what do I get next? 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 My consciousness is doing that over and over and over and over again. And so to stop that, to just say, no, there's no next. In that place we have possibility to encounter both. The reason that we don't like to do that is because we have to encounter this deep conditionality, which is suffering, but also is the key. It's also it's a gateway to prajna and to liberation. So we're here in the beginning of November, and the world will continue to turn. And for those of you who are in the practice period, we have we're about halfway through. Does that sound right? About halfway through. So the practice that you've been doing, there's a tendency for it to get kind of soft or wishy-washy. Not everybody, but there's a tendency for that. So if you're noticing that if you're a term student and you're noticing that happen, there's no reason for kind of self-flagellation about it, but just recognize it and then reflect back on, okay, why did I decide to do this? Like what was my intention coming forward in this? And then you can just reset that intention. And then rather than forcing your way in, kind of like doubling down with, go in with double awareness of your own being. Go in with double sensitivity to everything that's happening. Let that be where your effort goes, rather than your effort to the image of the kind of iron monk. Because that's what the thing that looks to you like an iron monk, the iron monk is doubling down on sensitivity. That's why they can practice like that, right? They're not doubling down on, well, some are, but they break. They break, that you get brittle when you practice that way. So double down on that sensitivity to your own experience, and lean into practice through that. And then there's a tendency to find the upswell of energy that comes from caring about why it is that you even practice in the first place. And we'll keep going together. There's double sit next week with Sanzen, and if you haven't come to see me privately, that's a really good opportunity. There's something that we can do in a face-to-face meeting there that is really, it can't be done any other way. So I would encourage everybody in that, and thank you for your practice and for your concern about how to make this way live in the world. First and foremost through yourself, but then that's what brings it to the world.